Okay, in this last segment on drinking water, private wells, I want to talk about the different kinds of wells because, there's different ways to do them and they come with different levels of safety associated with each. Obviously, you're best off with a city water type well where they're doing, multiple casings. Maybe they start with a 16-inch diameter casing and then they go down to a 12, and by the time you get to the bottom, you've got all this protection, and you're 1,000 feet down or whatever the number is, and you've got a lot of protection against having mice accidentally fall in or whatever, pesticides or manure exposure. There's going to be more protection against having bad water in those particular wells. By contrast, in these private wells, a lot more risk. So we're going to talk about that. The worst, most likely to be contaminated, is the well that is just dug, where Grandpa Joe gets out his shovel and he just starts digging a hole in the earth, trying to get to China. I tried to do that as a little kid. I think we all did. But if you're going to turn that into a well, just be aware that that's probably not going to be the world's safest method of getting clean water. Reason for that is that you've got all this loose fill, the backfill that's got to happen. There's going to be voids. There's going to be pathways for contaminated water to get down to the bottom, and it's just not the world's best way to do things. Those are going to be 10 to 30 feet. You can also imagine the safety issues associated with putting a man 30 feet down inside this hole with a shovel. The potential for cave-ins, the list just gets uglier. And so, if you hear that it's a dug hole, then that's not excellent. The next one would be a hole that is driven. And basically a driven hole just means they're putting a plug in and they're just pushing that plug through the soil. And that's going to be something that's maybe 30 to 50 feet deep. They're just pushing the soil and the rocks out of the way with something that is harder, stronger, and meaner. And that has some disadvantages because it tends to fill up the pores and results in a well that actually produces less well, but it's, a way to do a private well. Can be perhaps a little less expensive, but it's not great either. And again, those are going to be 30 to 50 feet, and preferably you're going to want to have those be down through a very tight soil like a clay, as opposed to a very loose soil that's going to drain contaminated water quickly like a silt or a sand or a gravel or a rocky sort of a material. Preferably you're going to have one that is drilled, and the drilled wells are going to be 100 to 400 feet deep. You might have multiple casings again where you start with a pipe that is larger diameter. They run that down for a certain distance and then they go to a smaller diameter. And then after things are done, if they do it well, they'll actually put what's called bentonite in there. And that's basically just a cement that when it comes in contact with water, it expands. The idea being that water gets in there, and as it expands, it's filling up all the voids in that area, so you're not going to get water in there and falls down the pipe, because if and when it does, A, it's sealed, and B, it's going to cause that bentonite to object, if you will, to the water moving that way. Ideally, again, you want to have at least a 5-foot clay layer somewhere in that geology that's going to protect your family. And then I mentioned you want to have casings when possible that are going to be protecting the well head. You also want to know a little bit about, now that's just the hole, you also want to know a little bit about the pump, how long it's been there, how reliable it may be, if there's a backup somewhere, and related information like that. If there's a guy in the neighborhood who knows a thing or two about wells generally and that well specifically. Okay, next section we're going to talk about the other end of the water chain, and that's the sewage and septic systems. Be right back.